Judge, it's so good to see you today. Uh, After we bumped into each other at Betsy's Pancakes, I I was excited when you agreed to sit down and have an interview.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about uh, where you grew up and what part of town was that?
It was the third ward on Bank Street. It was about three blocks from where Jimmy Kariski lived, the assessor, who ruled with an iron hand at that point. I mean, my aunt was, we lived with my aunt on Bank Street, and she was sort of politically connected. But when I came out the Army, the people from uh, Shep Morrison's camp came and recruited me to run for the House of Representatives. There were two at that time.
Let's back up just a little bit. So, when you're growing up on Bank Street, what year were you born?
34.
In 34. And where did you go to school?
Went to Sacred Heart, which was on Canal Street, the block away from Warren Easton. I went to grammar school. And then when I was in 8th grade, they made Sacred Heart coeducational. So I decided to stay there because I just thought I had a better chance of playing sports than going to Warren Easton. So I stayed 3 years there, but I finished at Easton. I graduated from Warren Easton in '52.
And then upon graduation,
Went to Loyola.
You went to Loyola.
Yeah, I was in the combined degree program at that time, where you could use your first year of law school as your electives to get an undergraduate degree. Everyone was obligated to go into the ROTC the first 2 years. Second, third, and fourth years was discretionary. But at that time, everything was heating. Korea had just ended, and the Southeast Asia was just really getting volatile. So they were making people take the, they were drafting you out of school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to advanced ROTC, which they said you could take both degrees at the end of 6 years. And then you could take your commission at that time. But then they changed it and said as soon as you got your first degree, they said they were making you take your first degree after your first year in law school. As soon as you got your first degree, they were drafting people out of, I think Tom Early, that happened to him. And so I just dropped some courses, so I didn't get an undergraduate degree, I just got the law degree.
So when you graduated from law school, is that when you went into the military?
Yeah, right after I graduated, I got admitted to the bar in June, and I went in September. I went into the military. I was in a 6-month program. One of those said, "Take down your battle star, mother, your sons in the ROTC."
So you were in the JAG Corps, weren't you?
Right. I went into the military police, but I transferred to the JAG.
So when you graduated from Loyola Law, what year would that have been?
58.
In 58. And so how long were you in the service?
I had 6 months in active duty and then 7.5 years in reserve. But I came out in March of 59, and that was the year they had the gubernatorial race when Shep Morrison was running. And so that's when they came to me and wanted me to run for the House of Representatives. And in retrospect, I guess I was foolish because I told them, I said, I can't win. These people are too entrenched. Oh, well, yeah, you can.
How would they elect in the House of Reps
at that time? They had two in the third ward.
So you would run at large in the third
top
ward.
two. The top two would be elected.
And they ran it on tickets back then. That's how,
right,
in other words, the governor would put out a ticket.
Not only that, but in order to have, you had to have poll watchers, but you had to have a candidate in the race, so that they were just using me as to run in order to make sure that they had every precinct was covered by a poll watcher.
You said Shep Morrison had run for governor at that point. He was serving as the mayor of New Orleans at that time, correct? Or was he?
No, I think he was out of office already.
He was out of office at that time. And who were some of the other candidates running for the state rep seat at that time?
I mean, the ones I ran against?
Yes.
Vernon Gregson and Cutter Clark.
And you had mentioned how there were political tickets back then, and I think you made reference to.
It was the CCE. I was on a CCDA ticket. That was Shep Morrison's group.
And the other political powerhouse at the time was the RDO.
Right.
And
that was actually Comiskey's group, RDO, the Regular Democrats Association.
And when you ran in the fall of 1959, you mentioned earlier that your aunt was a ward leader.
Yeah, she was well connected, and as I say, I never gave that a thought when I let them convince me to run. And I told them, I said, I'm just coming out the army. I can't even afford to pay the qualification fee. They said, we'll take care of that.
When you said we, it was the CCDA group?
Well, I'm talking about, when I say we, I'm talking about me and my wife. Now, that was, I was on a CCDA ticket, but and funny thing that I decided that I was going to get beaten, but I didn't want to get beaten too badly, so I started knocking on doors at night, and I'd go on the porch, and this elderly ladies would answer the door, and I said, how do you do? I'm John Shea, I'm a young lawyer. I said, I'm running on the Morrison CCDA ticket. She said, you run against Comiskey's people? I said, yes, ma'am. So get off my porch.
You didn't want to run afoul of the assessors back then.
He used to give turkeys out at Christmas time. I mean, he was just ruled with such an iron hand. And the funny thing is that there was a fellow by the name, I think it was Dutchman, I can't remember. He was the senator. And when you got your Ontario commission from law school, the senator delivered it to you. They wouldn't bring me mine because I had run.
So you were still living in that area on Bank Street when you ran?
I understand the question, yes.
Well, that was your rest.
That was my domicile.
That was your domicile.
Well, different definition back then, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure we ever really got the clean definition on domicile.
But yeah, and then as I say, it worked out. I mean, I got beaten badly, but it wasn't as bad if I had not actually gone and knocked on doors and introduced myself to the people, even with some of the poor reception I got there.
So Morrison was running against Earl Long
in
that race, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's backtrack just a little bit, Judge. You weren't an only child. You had
we had two brothers.
And
an older brother and a younger brother.
And what were their names?
Frank was a criminal judge. He also worked in the DA's office like I did. And then my younger brother was Al, who wound up working as a clerk in civil court for years.
So after the race, you obviously started your law practice?
I went into with my brother we were in the 400 block of Carondelet Street, and didn't have any practice. They just got the leftovers that they didn't want. And Lou Trent, we had a couple other people in the office. And I did that, and then I later in I think the beginning of '60, I went into the public defender's office in the criminal court. I served there for 2 years.
When you said you were in your brother's office, or you were sharing space?
Well, before he was elected.
Right. And so this is early 1960.
59, early 60.
Who were some of the other lawyers in the office?
Lou Trent, who became a traffic court judge. And, I can't remember. There were a couple other people. They had a office space with about 6 or 7 smaller offices in it. So they had a court reporter and a guy in the finance business. So it wasn't all lawyers. I think those were the three of us, but my brother, myself, and Lou Trent was on it.
And Was your practice primarily a criminal practice at the time, or?
Just anything, any trash that was left over that they didn't want.
Anything that walked in the door, huh?
So when you went to the public defender's office, how long did you stay there?
2 years. And then I went right from there to the DA's, to the district attorney's office.
And who was the district attorney? At that time?
Garrison.
Garrison had just become the district attorney?
Would you like to divert a little bit about the Garrison race?
Sure.
We met every Friday. The staff for the DA's office was my brother, myself, Garrison, a guy by the name of Frank Klein, named of Dalton Williams, and Dennis Barry. Klein was also running for the DA. So we tried to convince Garrison to get out the race because Frank Klein was running on the Paul Burke's ticket, who was also running for mayor at the time. Paul Burke was ultimately the brother of the assessor. Okay.
Well, Paul Burke had been he had been on the city council,
Right.
and okay.
And he was running. He was running for the mayor. So we tried to convince Garrison to get out the race because we thought Klein, with organized support, was going to do better. Well, they were going to have the first open-end television program in which all the candidates were going to appear, what they call an open-end. It was Richard Darling, Irvin Diamond.
So Dowling was the incumbent DA at the time.
Right.
All right, go ahead.
And then Irvin Diamond and Frank Klein, I think it was Earl Amity and Garrison. Well, told Garrison, this was a Friday before the thing was on Sunday night. Said, Jim, man, the only thing you're gonna do is hurt Klein because you all gonna draw from the same area. He said, let me see what happens at the open end, this debate on Sunday night. If I don't do well, I'll get out. Well, Garrison appeared with his three-piece suit and a pipe in his mouth. He was a nice-looking guy. I don't know who set it up or something. They asked the question. They asked Diamond first. By the way, Darling didn't show up. They advised him, don't come in because everybody's going to attack you. They asked Diamond, will you be a full-time DA? No, Garrison said that first. I'm sorry. Garrison said, if I get elected, I'll be a full-time DA. So they asked Diamond, will you be a full-time DA? He said, if you want somebody at $17,000 a year to be the DA, don't vote for me. And they didn't.
They listened to him.
Garrison was an overnight success. By Monday morning, he was so entrenched that we couldn't get him out the race. I mean, of course, Klein stayed in and didn't. But Garrison and Darling went in the runoff. And the press hated Darling because there was allegedly so much shenanigans going on in the DA's office at the time. So Darling was older. So when they had another open end with just the two candidates. They trained the camera on his hands, which was very full of veins, and just to show how old he was. So the press was very involved in those days. So Garrison.
Sounds like a lot of parallels to the Kennedy and Nixon race. The one looked better on television. Huh?
Right.
So after Garrison gets elected, you're one of the first group of assistant district attorneys that are hired?
Right. We have very minimal staff, so I think most of the people have now deceased. I think I'm one of the few that's left.
Who were some of the people who came?
Al Oza, Phil Foto, a guy by the name of Malcolm Mundy.
Was Charlie Ward?
Charlie Ward.
Right.
Charlie Ward was working for the U.S. government in the income tax division and took a job as one of the section assistants, which I was also. And then after the first year, my brother then got elected to the judgeship in '63.
Was Al Ozer in the DA's office?
Yeah.
Al Ozer?
Oh, okay. And so when Frank got elected, and I was able, they gave me the executive assistant, which I tried capital cases at that time.
And how long did you stay full-time? Was that a full-time position?
Yes, some of us were able to do a little bit office practice, but basically it was a full-time position. I was making, as the executive assistant, I was making $11,000 a year.
And this is 1962, 63?
63, yeah.
Ballpark.
Well, but able to support a family, you know. But,
And by this time in 63, were you still living in the mid-city community, or?
No, I had then moved. When I first came out the Army, we moved to Parker Street, right off of Gentilly Boulevard. And then ultimately I moved out to the east.
And you said you got out of the Army, or went in and got out somewhere in 1959.
Right, March of '59.
But you had already had, I suppose you had a son when you were.
Mark was born. I went in the Army in September. Mark was born the next month in October.
He was born in 58 or 59?
58.
58. And he's your oldest child. You have four children?
We have boy, girl. Scott is third.
And when you left the DA's office, or when did you leave the DA's office?
65. I left in June of 65, and it was in September of 65 that Garrison first started the investigation with Clay Shaw and the Garrison. I mean, in the Kennedy assassination. It's when that was the primary focus of the whole office at that point, you know. It's, I didn't leave for that reason. I just felt that I had exhausted the time. I had gotten enough training that I wanted to go out and be in practice.
So where did you, was your private office still at 400 Carondelet Street?
No. By that time, Trent had moved right around the corner to Perdita Street, and he had a vacant office. I went with him at the time.
And what type of practice did you do?
I had just a little. The civil practice had not taken off yet. At that point, my practice was mostly in the criminal field. You know, at that point, because of my background. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that, and none of the practices were as lucrative as they are today. Okay, of course, the cost of living was less also, but it was. I did most of that. I did some civil work and fun. Yeah.
So in 1965, 66, is that when you relocated your family further into New Orleans East?
No, I moved to New Orleans East in. No, I take that back. I'm sorry. I moved to Parker Street first when I first came out the Army in '59. Mm-hmm. Stayed there for a few years, and then finally, right before I went to the DA's office, we moved to the East. You know. And
when we say New Orleans East,
I was talking about Arthur Drive, which was one of the first streets off of Chef Highway, one of the first developments in the East.
Castle Manor.
That was Castle Manor. I was thinking because they had so many different.
It was Castle Manor, and it was Castle Manor East, and then after that.
Because you had Lancelot and Arthur and some of those other streets there.
Right.
So you were one of the pioneers out there.
My brother Frank had lived out there. Actually, I took his house. He had built a house in Lakeview, and it was vacant, and he couldn't sell it. And we were looking for. By that time, I had my second child, Aaron, was born, and we were living in a one-bedroom, one-bath house that was become too small. So we moved to my brother's house, and actually, we wasn't there a week when Scott was born.
And that was what you said, 1962?
Scott was born in 63.
63. And so, tell me, what led you back into politics down the road? You're practicing law?
Well, we supported Malcolm O'Hara the criminal judgeship because he and my brother they had worked for O'Hara in the DA's office before. Then Frank went back in with Garrison at the same time as I did. Okay, so then after Frank got elected, after O'Hara ran the year before in '62, so we helped him and we sort of get drifted into the politics. And my brother ran in '63 and got elected.
And after your brother got elected, did you work in other political campaigns?
Just peripherally, not extensively, but just stuff and met Nat Kiefer playing basketball at the NOAC. He had heard that at that time A.D. Smith had gotten elected to the Senate, and his House seat was vacant. And Nat had heard that I wanted to run, and he asked me. I said no, and I said, "Will you help me?" I said yes. So we struck up a relationship at that point. And
so this is Nat Kiefer lived in New Orleans East at that time,
right?
And the House seat would have covered. Do you recall the area that we were talking about?
I think it's from the Danziger Bridge all the way out. I mean, I think it all the way to the Parish line, I believe, at that point. I think it didn't overlap with St. Bernard like it did ultimately, I think. So
it was similar similar districts to when you ran for the House seat, where it was out of a certain
No,
board.
I never did run for the House seat.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I never did run for the House seat. It was asked to me because they thought that I was interested in it, and I wasn't, but I don't know how that rumor got started. But nobody else had asked me to help them, so when Nat asked me, I had no problem with.
And who were some of the people in that race? Do you recall?
No, I don't. Oh, well, yeah, Hap Glawdy. Hap Glawdy.
Hap Glawdy, the old broadcaster, the sportscaster.
Right, and Nat beat him and became a representative. I don't know how many years, and then A.D. Smith died in a tractor accident in his farm while he was the state senator, and then Nat decided to run for that. And then they wanted me to run for the House, and I told them no. And so that Charlie Barella got elected as to the representative, and that's when he went for 4 years, and then Ron Shea beat him.
1976.
Something like that. I can't remember.
So Kiefer became the state senator in New Orleans East in sometime 72, 73. Is that about right?
Roland, I can't remember. I think it was
early 70s.
Because it was in 78 that he lost for the mayor's race. I remember that. 77. Because I qualified in 78 for the judgeship.
Okay. So you were pretty active in New Orleans East, and your law practice had grown.
Right.
Same way your family.
And also, I had gotten elected to the State Central Committee, and I was able to help people with certain problems that they had on a pro bono basis, so that it actually inured to my benefit later on when I ran, because I helped a lot of people citywide.
When did you first get elected to the State Central Committee? Roughly.
Yeah, I think I was there for about 8 years, I think.
So, and that would have been prior to your running for the judgeship.
Right. I ran for the judgeship in 78, took office January 1, 79.
So let's talk about that race. You ran, it was a fall of 78 race?
Right.
Okay. And this was really your first effort since that very first run.
Right. And I don't recall ever announcing that I had run for the House of Representatives and gotten beaten. I didn't deny it, but I didn't volunteer the information.
A hole in the resume. You didn't want to mention that. So, political resume.
I ran against Andrew Becerra, was a municipal judge. we were building a house. I'd gone to him, said, Andrew, I'd like to run for the house, for this judgeship, but if you could run for re-election, I would not run against you. You've been a friend of mine. He said, I appreciate that. So we were building a house, and I was at the house one morning. We didn't have a phone. This was before the cell phones. My wife came and said, Judge Bucara called you, wants you to come see him. He was sitting in criminal court at the time. Wanted to see me. He said, I just want to tell you, he said, I'm not running. He said, but my son-in-law is running. He said, but I told him, if you run, don't run against him because you can't beat him. So I said, I appreciate that. So that was just Montelepre and I that ran against each other.
And Philip Montelepre was Andrew Bucaro's son-in-law?
Right.
And that was the race in 1978, correct?
Right.
And what else was on the ballot at that time? Was there a gubernatorial race at that time?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I know there was some judgeships or something, but I'm not really sure.
A recollection was there was a civil district court judgeship up at that time.
I think Bobby Katz got elected at the same time I did.
Mm-hmm.
And he took office a little early because his spot was vacant. So right after he got elected, I think the primary was in September or October, and there was a vacancy, so he was able to take office. I couldn't take office till January 1, 1979.
So, Judge, when you ran in 78, give us an idea of what the politics were like at the time. Who was the mayor in 1978? Was that Morial at that point?
Dutch Morial?
It was Dutch. It was Dutch.
Did you run with the administration support?
No, he stayed out of the race.
And what
I think his dad, I'm not sure, but Montelepre's father had become friendly with Morial and been a contributor, so that rather than to support him, he stayed neutral. Yeah.
And what type of support did you enjoy at that time?
Just Kiefer's organization.
We had a
labor.
We had a lot of labor support.
Very across the board labor. Labor was very active at that time, very effective at that during those times. They helped you considerably.
And when you say Kiefer's organization, earlier we had talked about the CCDA and the RDO. Was there a separate organization in New Orleans East that Kiefer was working with?
I can't remember the name of it, but they had the women's organization had a thing called Wiggle. I can't remember Kiefer's dog. Can you remember?
New Orleans East. It was something with New Orleans.
Nova.
Nova. That was it. Nova.
Yeah, New Orleans East Voters Association.
Yes, that was it. Yes.
So that was the Kiefer group, because at the time, many of either the state senators or the mayor, they had these groups with acronyms.
Right. Well, I had a lot of black support too, because I had struck up a relationship with some of the black groups, and they supported me too.
Who was your campaign manager back then, Judge?
Well, sort of ran it myself, and with Kiefer's help, and he, of course, it wasn't a full-time campaign manager because he was working for Jones Walker as a lawyer at the time, so that, but I had I did a spot. It was funny. They decided I sat down with the guy, and I can't remember his name. First name was Rusty, I believe, and he's dead now. But they asked me what I did, and I said I coached some teams at the park right across from my house, and
I was Kerry Curley.
Curley, and so they said, "Well, let's do something." So they did something with the kids playing ball, and I was the umpire, and the kid slid in the home, and I called him out. And the umpire friend of mine said, "You idiot! we don't use the thumbs up anymore. What's this? She said, you alienated, you might have won some other people, you alienated all the umpires.
It was an interesting commercial. I mean, it resonated with people. It was a commercial. It was different, and people remembered it.
So, in running for the municipal court judgeship in 1978, you had a TV, you had at least one TV commercial.
Oh, yeah.
Do you recall how much money you spent on that race?
Well, I decided I was going to commit $25,000 because that was about all I could afford, and I figured I could raise another 25. Well, I wanted to spend 150, and that was in '78.
It was a lot of money in 1978, and your opponent was perceived of as a pretty wealthy candidate.
Oh, he was. His grandfather owned the hospital on Canal Street, Mount Leprey Hospital, right across from Sacred Heart School. And then his father managed the hospital, and he was. I think he financed his campaign on his own, without his father did. Not he, but his father did. So that was it. Mine were more of a grassroots because I couldn't match dollar for dollar with him.
So when you got elected in 1978 and took office January 1 of 79, your brother was still a criminal court judge,
right,
since 1963,
right,
correct? And how long did you go on to serve on the municipal court bench?
30 years. Then I had 7 years as an ad hoc. So after the 30 years.
After the 30 years, so you retired in 2009, and for 7 years you continued on as an ad hoc.
Right.
And if I recall, you said your oldest son Mark, he ultimately became elected
to the traffic court. Yeah.
And what year was that?
Same year as 2009, the same year that I retired, I believe.
So
I think he ran in September, I believe, September or October.
And he continues to serve as a traffic court judge.
Well, they've now consolidated the courts. The traffic and municipal courts are now consolidated. It's one entity right now, rather than, so they handle both traffic and municipal cases.
But he continues to serve on that bench today, correct?
Right.
So
in the interim, of course, you know that Scott got elected.
I'm about to ask you that, Judge. I'm not gonna. I can see he's antsy over there. I'm not gonna leave him out. So, in terms of the judiciary, there's been a Shea elected to the Louisiana judiciary since 1963 through today's date.
Right.
And as you mentioned, in somewhere from 63 to 68 or so, you got elected to the State Central Committee. And then you actually had one of your sons, the one sitting next to you who keeps kneeing you at this point, was elected to the New Orleans City Council.
Elected to the school board first.
Oh God, that's right. I'd totally forgotten about that. Not one of those resume holes. Right? And what year were you elected to the school board?
1997.
And what year were you elected to the city council?
2000.
And then you served on the city council for
2 years.
2 years.
Yes.
And so he was, as I understood it, Judge, and you correct me if I'm wrong, somewhat the black sheep of the family because he was a Republican, if I understand, if the rumors were correct.
Correct.
Well, his younger sister registered when she first registered as a Republican. I'm not sure she knew what she was doing, but
checked the wrong box as far as Dad was concerned.
And because of the geography and the politics and demographics early on, I'm assuming, and let me ask so we're correct, your brother Frank Shea was was elected as a Democrat.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe you were as well, correct?
You could not get elected citywide in those days as a Republican. It was just not the city was too, the Republican input was not that great at that point.
And even statewide at that point,
right?
It was I mean, certainly the demographics have shifted over time, statewide and in neighboring parishes, and
right.
to some degree inside of Orleans Parish. So tell me, what was it that drove you to public service, Judge?
Well, I'm not really sure. I saw municipal court, and it was actually at that point the judges could maintain a law practice. You never let it interfere with the judgeship, but you could in off hours you're not obligated to stay in your chambers 8 hours a day, so you could maintain a law practice. And it was, my law practice was just starting to build up a little bit, so I didn't want to get elected to something that I had to give it up totally. So I continued to maintain it, and then, it realized afterwards, because I had practice in there to somewhat extent in municipal and traffic courts, and I saw what, because it's quite a bit different than it is today.
Well, and in fact, 3 of your 4 children have gone on to become attorneys, haven't they?
Right.
And
my youngest daughter was a court reporter also. And
do your 3 children practice law with you, or?
Well, they did until recently, until about a year ago, a little more longer. Mark became full-time and doesn't practice anymore. Scott and Aaron still maintain a law practice with us.
So was that one of the changes that you mentioned with the court, that on top of consolidation of the traffic and municipal courts becoming the same court?
They had an option for a certain period of time. They could go full-time at that point, or they could remain as part-time judges, or take that back. I hate that word part-time, because I said judges who could maintain a law practice for a while, but I forget what the sunset date is, that everybody who's going to be on that bench has to be full-time. Okay.
Mm-hmm. They're no longer permitted to have an outside practice.
Right. So it's always been an attractive position for a lot of lawyers that always wanted to do that. I think it's losing some of its attractiveness now that they have to go full time.
What did you enjoy the most about being on the municipal court bench?
The interaction with people. I've always felt me and my whole family, including Scott, Mark, and Aaron, and Michelle too, that we all were people persons, and municipal court, like all other courts, unlike all other courts, as you see so many people every day that it's, in the times that we were most productive, it was maybe 100 people a day, as you saw it, and it's the ability to help people, even if you really were angry at somebody, the maximum sentence you could give would be 6 months in jail. So it's so that you had a chance to work with people. We did a lot of truancies. We did a lot of the kids that just wouldn't go to school. We had the school board was very active with us at that point.
And that's interesting, because you would think that the truancy cases would be brought more in juvenile court, not in municipal court.
Well, it is, because if they're only going to charge the student who's, they had to go to juvenile court, because our threshold was 17 years. If it was the child was over 17, or if it was the parent that they were going to prosecute, it had to come to municipal court.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have authority in juvenile court to do anything.
And you would say during those time periods, you thought that the school board was very active in monitoring that.
They had I forget what the word they used, but they had somebody in every court that stayed on top of the cases and worked with the people, try to impress upon them the importance of the kid going to school rather than just letting them, because a lot of times, and this was across the board, that they lost control of the kid when it became 12 or 13 years old. They couldn't, they just resisted going to school, and in most cases it was single parent raising the kids and had no education themselves, so never could appreciate the importance of an education, and so there's a lot of dropouts, and and we effectively when we had kids, even the parents, we used the weekend warriors. If it reached a point where we exhausted all ability to help them, all cooperation with them, they'd go to jail on Friday at 5 o'clock and go home on Sunday at 5 o'clock. That way, if they had a job or they had the kids in school, it wouldn't interfere with but at least it was sending a message to them that at this point that
So when you were able to help some of those families at least keep the children in school.
Let me interject also. That was not the biggest part. The biggest part of our thing was the domestic violence.
Tell me about that.
I was fortunate because I inherited a guy by the name of Mike Gretsch, who has written 3 books and been very active, very intelligent, and was really a pioneer in the domestic violence area. And he took me under his wing, and we were, at that point when I took the bench, and I'm not looking for an accolade or anything, that the idea is that if you had reluctant witnesses, partners that said, I don't want to prosecute, they would just automatically dismiss the cases. When we took the position that the victim was nothing more than a witness to a crime, which is really what criminal court is. I mean, there's no victim doesn't have any inalienable right to drop a charge because it's up to the district attorney, the prosecutor, to decide whether they're going to drop charges or not. But of course, you use the input of the victim in a lot of cases to make a decision in the thing. But eventually, what we did was we took a hard line with the victims in the case, and just at least monitor the cases. We felt that with the open case, it was more of a deterrent to repeat performance by the defendant than it would be if they were the case just automatically went away.
So you said you inherited Mike Gretsch. If I recall correctly, municipal court, you had a social worker that was assigned to the court, or am I not remembering that exactly?
No, this happened later on because at that time they were all working on the federal grants, and so that it was just really a hit and miss type situation with them, so that we were able to get to create the municipal court probation officer through the city, and they actually became full-time probation officers, so that they were able to appreciate what was going on a lot better than people who were working under the contract and working under the federal grants.
And so that was his classification. He became a probation officer for your division.
Right. Actually, we had 4, one for each division. Rather, before that, they would rotate. So the judge might take the bench and not have a probation officer before that. As I say, not necessarily.
And that was 15 years before that domestic violence cases really got the publicity that they get. Well before that.
Judge, I guess we didn't really lay out initially how municipal court was set up, but it was essentially 4 judges were elected throughout the parish of Orleans.
And they were elected every 2 years. It was when they were created one at a time. Now, traffic court initially the first two were created one at a time, and then when the legislature met the last time, they added two more at the same time, so that there was an equal 4 traffic court judges and 4 municipal court judges. But the municipal court judges go back to, they called them Recorder's Court in those long time ago when they first, which the person who sat in the Recorder's Court didn't have to be a judge. And so but it stayed like that till I forget, maybe the 1929 Constitution, I believe, maybe it's possibly.
And my appreciation, and I may not be correct, but that initially they used to sit on Charter Street in the second floor of the police.
That's correct. And then they moved to the top of the First District Police Station on Rampart. Not Rampart. No, not
St. Claude. No, it's
no. I can't think of the name of the street, but it's right across from the First District. I mean, on top of the First District.
right.
And then when they built the building for traffic and municipal court, they both moved over there.
And municipal court, as you mentioned earlier, dealt with offenses that the penalty was
6 months.
6 months would be the maximum
Right.
in incarceration period. And you mentioned how you had truancy cases and domestic violence cases early on.
Shopliftings, people that broke into houses, but they never thought the district attorney or the police department never thought they had enough sufficient evidence to make a burglary out of it. They would charge them with trespassing in
A
municipal.
lot of drunken public stuff.
Right, drunk, yeah.
Prostitution too. Yeah, didn't you handle some of that in the beginning as well?
Yeah, prostitution, and then there was a lot of the drug addicts that the police would pick them up. In those days, they could arrest them even though they didn't have any drugs on them. They could arrest them for it was something called no visible means of support.
Yes. So, Judge, in closing, what advice would you give of a young lawyer getting out of school today?
Well, it's very difficult because I think that these kids go to law school and they get the impression that when they get out of school they're going to be overnight millionaires. And I think that they get out and they have no experience, no appreciation of how the system works. I think if they would get involved in the municipal traffic and criminal courts, even the civil courts, but more so the other three, would be that it would give them the appearance and give them some impression upon themselves, and not impression, but some ability to be comfortable in front of a judge. And since there's no juries in a municipal court, the traffic court, but you get a chance to try more cases in those two courts than you do in the other places.
And you see the immediate impact on people's lives.
It's positively, as I say, handling many people is, it's a court of first impression. It's most people don't get exposed to the district courts like criminal court and civil court for the first time out. It's something that shoplifting and stuff like that.
What do we estimate when you retired, Dad? You had maybe handled 10,000 cases, maybe?
Oh, more than that, I think. Yeah.
10, 15,000 people, individuals come in front of you. 30 years.
Well, thank you so much for your service and the amount of lives you've touched in this community.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's you don't go in there looking for that, but it's an afterthought. It's probably something that you realize, and be surprised how many people still recognize me is, after all, it's 9 years since I've retired, so, and still people, and
Well,
my brother and I had a somewhat different reputation.
I was just about to say, when I was a young lawyer, your brother was still on the bench and you were on the bench. And when they would say Judge Shea, they'd go, the nice Shea or the other one? And you were always thought of to be the nice Shea.
No, but something funny, Frank was a hard sell. The jurors loved him, but the rest of the lawyers and the public didn't. So when he was running for re-election, and we were in a tough race. So I go to people and say, gonna help my brother? I said, man, hell with your brother. He doesn't help anybody, doesn't tell anybody hello. Why should we help him? I said, well, you realize that if he loses, I have to take him in my law office and be with him 8 hours a day. He said, well, that's a good reason, and I'll help him.
I remember when he was up for re-election, they ran your picture instead of Uncle Frank's picture. They might have put him over the top.
That's why we did it. In the comparison page, they used to do those comparisons. And they said, oh, y'all had somebody in the Times-Picayune that I said we had nothing to do with it. I was so surprised. Anyway, we called them and told them, and then the morning after the election, they ran the same thing. Can we turn off this out? I don't want this on.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Judge.